I think about the removing of the Confederate statues, and most of them are moved to either another part of town or they're moved into a museum or some type. So they're not being destroyed, for the most part. They're just being moved. But I do think one of the, for some reason, the Confederate statues have been attached with and emboldened. It emboldens people to continue the ideals for which it stands instead of remembering the history for which it was a part of. And I think that's where it becomes, it becomes dangerous and it becomes harmful to society when you see this statue and it's like, I want to continue this hate. I want to continue this discrimination. I want to continue this. I want to continue the separation. I want to continue. Let's go all the way back to slavery. Let's reverse everything, because this can, when you see and when people see the Confederate statues as that's when it becomes dangerous. If it was just a symbol of when I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, born and raised, and when we went to the Mardi Gras parades, we always went to Lee Circle, right? Lee Circle was, they had a big old tall statue of Robert E. Lee. And for me, I was just, until, my age of enlightenment in college, after I moved away, I thought it was just a great place to go to a Mardi Gras parade. That was just a statue, it was a decoration. Then I started, when I learned about who Robert E. Lee was, I was like, and it had a different meaning for me. And it was interesting because most of the people who were there in that circle, around that circle, when the folks came around, were people who looked like me. And I'm like, I wonder how many of us know what the history of this statue is, right? And then I begin to feel like, am I in some way supporting the ideals and the ideas that came along with this statue? And then when I came back to New Orleans and I started talking to some of my friends, some of my Caucasian friends, and they began to tout Robert E. Lee as this national hero, like, for whose nation, and so and I began to hear in their conversation, even with me that I've known, we've grown up together, same neighborhoods and things, that they did not see the statue as a part of history, but they saw it as a set of ideals to be espoused and to practice even still today. And so, I think that's where the danger for about these Confederate statues comes in, because they just moved Robert E. Lee statue right in New Orleans not too long ago, to a museum. So I think that was my response for that. For the narrative portion, I like narratives, because I think the narratives help you to stand or to get in someone else's shoes. When I was listening to Ryan and Nicole talking about their experience, and I've heard other stories before about the experience in South Africa, it enabled me to suspend my belief or my, I was able to go into the places where they were, right? And I was able to begin to imagine where they were and try to feel that experience of, being in your feelings, not wanting to go in, and then the change, right? I was able to experience all of that because you were telling your story. And so I think stories are important, the narratives are important to tell, especially when both parties are willing to be mutually engaged. Because what narratives, I believe, help do is help you to understand the other person and their views. And when you understand the other person and their views, then I believe that it really makes it really hard for you to hate them. Because if I begin to understand where you come, even though you may think about hate and all this other stuff, if I really take the time to understand, and I'm not sitting there being defensive, I can't believe they think like that. You ought to be mad at if I just take time to really understand genuinely why they think that way, why they feel that way, then I believe, I think it makes it harder for me to hate them, right? And it makes me more empathetic to where they're coming from. And I believe it's at that place. If both people are listening to each other and both people are engaging each other, I believe it's at that place where we can begin to put, the tracks on, like the picture is, on both sides, and begin to build a track down both sides instead of, like I saw in Israel and Palestine, build this humongous wall with cattle cages for people to walk through.
As you pass the mic, there's a marvelous quote that I think relates to what you're saying. During apartheid, a black pastor in South Africa said, "The thing that concerns me is that by the time they," talking about the whites, "by the time they get around to loving us, we shall have gotten around to hating them." That's an important word.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Okay, guys. All right. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to the audience to see if you guys have any questions for the pastors, including Reverend Caldwell, if I can untangle myself here.
Let's give Michelle Gladden a hand. She untangled the moderator herself. And as she does what she's doing, how many of you remember the name of Gwen Ifill, that African-American woman? That's one of your heroines, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Hard loss.
Yes, hard loss, yeah.
Very hard loss. Okay. Start with Mr. Trump.
I just have to know. Yeah, don't stop. The question, of course, is to Pastor Carmel. You went to Israel. Did you see? Oh, who went to Israel? Oh, pardon me. Okay. Did you hear of or see any of the so-called Falasha, or the black Jews that were lifted out of Ethiopia some 15 to 20 years ago? Or any indigenous Jews that look like most of us in this room?
Yeah. They were there, and it's so they were there, and it's so interesting because they knew their best to hide them, but the Ethiopian Jews were present, and the only reason that I saw them on this last trip was because we had a guide who was Jewish. Right, and Sippy pointed them out to her. I'm looking at Marilyn because she went with us this trip, and we had a guy that was Jewish. But the thing is that when you're in Israel, there are all shades of people, but it's a lot of times people think only the traditional Hasidic Jews or Orthodox Jews that have the curls and wear the all of the press shawls and things of that nature are Jews. But there are different sects of Jews that are there that people don't know. And so but the Ethiopian Jews were there. And then it was interesting because even Dor, who was our guide on the way back to the airport to Tel Aviv, he was he looked more Palestinian than he looked Jew, but he was Jew. And so we really, one of the things is that I would have loved to have a conversation with one of the Ethiopian Jews to find out their narrative. Now, we didn't have that time, but I would have loved to hear what they think about, because not too far, back in the Jewish history, they all were dark because they came from the Fertile Crescent, and which we know as of the Middle East and Africa, and so they looked like me. Right? That most Jews look like me until they got dispersed and ended up going to some of the European places. They began to intermarry, interbreed, and that's a bad word. Intermarry. Let's think of that. There we go. And the skin color became lighter, but for the most part, right? But the Jewish history, though, is of a dark people. And the Ethiopians were there, but you could tell that there was some shame or some way that they wanted to hide them, in a way. So.
Anyone else have a question before we break into groups? I'm going to come this way and come around.
Well, am I close? I think it's the speaker. Hold it away. Is that good?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, like this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is fine. This is very interesting to me because there's a connection between South Africa and Israel. I was just telling Lorraine about, and Linda, and Brother Bill. Israel was a big supporter of the apartheid South African regime until the very end. So it's very interesting to me that you combine the two of these together. Even after the United States and Britain and Europe gave up on the apartheid regime, and it took a long time for them to give up to begin with, Israel still was the major supporter of the apartheid. So it's astonishing to me, Pastor Van Zend's point of view. I was astonished because my friend Charlie also went. He lives in Red Bank, and he came back with, he was spiteful of Palestinians. He said, I went there to, I spend money and they kind of like, spit at my face kind of thing. Well, you go, it's a black man, by the way, but you go there as an American, and this country, unfortunately, is the major supporter of Israel's policies. I mean, if this country didn't support Israel all the way, Israel would kind of like say, I have to figure out a way to resolve this issue with Palestinians. This is why this issue keeps on going, because of this country's support. And all those people that you saw in those cattle things, that's pretty much slave labor, and Israel has free right to import to the United States using that pretty much slave labor. So it's a really good deal. You get all the slave-free labor, has nowhere to go, and you can export to the United States tax-free. Like as if you were in this country. But it's in the final analysis, it's not really good for Jews, because this is not going to end up in a good place. Eventually, it's not. I think a more just settlement needs to happen. And by the way, I'm a Turkish, so I'm a descendant of all those people of the Ottoman Empire you mentioned, and I'm a Muslim agnostic, so I'm a little bit more informed than the average American. So that's my.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful.
Yeah, let me just respond to that real quick. That $6 billion you mentioned is $6 billion of your tax dollars goes to the oppression of the Palestinians. $6 billion a year. And so we went to some protected places, but the last time I went to a place where the Palestinians were not that fond of Americans, because every time we buy something at the grocery store, the gas station, or pay our income tax, we are making it possible for the United States to send another $6 billion into the land that the Israelis use to build on the Palestinians' land, these settlements that the Israelis use to build on the Palestinian land. And so it's like we're being oppressed by American policies and values and things, and that translates into all kinds of stuff. But I just want to, $6 billion of your tax dollars every year goes to make sure that the Palestinians are being oppressed.
Hi. I think it's very interesting that the issue of the Confederate statues came up today, because at my job today, I got into a very heated discussion. Well, I can't even call it a discussion, but voices were raised. And it started out, it was crazy, because it started out with my supervisor saying something like, oh, they can give me the Confederate statues and I'll put them in my backyard. I didn't say anything when he made that statement. But then when another one of my coworkers says, yeah, they need to get over it, that's when I lost it. Because how dare you say we need to get over it? You don't even understand what history is about. And so then my supervisor says, well, I got a right to say what I got to say. And I said, I got a right to say what I got to say, and what you're saying is totally wrong. The place became a pin drop. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word, okay? And so when you say that these Confederate statues are wrapped up in culture, for me, it's not culture. It's outright racist hatred of black people, and they want to put the neck of oppression on black people's neck. And that's what they're comfortable with, and that's what that represents. But unfortunately, these people are so ignorant, they don't even realize why they're saying what they're saying, because these people that within my surroundings, they didn't know what they were talking about. They really don't understand. They just see it as something where white people want this, and black people or brown people are causing this to go down, so therefore it has to be wrong. But my whole point of this conversation, which maybe at some point where it can be at a different level, but I'm going to HR tomorrow to make sure it's going to be at a different level. But the bottom line is, they need to, they don't know that they're sprouting ignorance, and that's what got me ticked off. Like I said, initially I was not going to respond to that ignorant statement, but don't let anybody tell me I got to get over it, because I will not.
Okay. Michelle, you're getting ready to go to the group, so I'd like to say something before we break into the group.
Absolutely. So I just handed out a couple of questions to individuals in the audience. What I'd like you to do.
Can Ms. Stoll be the last one to speak? Is that okay? She had her hand up.
Oh, sure.
Oh,
sure. Okay. What I'd like you guys to do is the people that I gave cards to, find a group of 3, 4, 5 people together, preferably people you don't know. Discuss the question.